Before I begin, just in case there is anyone new to Elden Ring or FromSoft games and it sounds like I'm speaking complete gibberish, I'll leave a link in the description to a site that explains some of the basic terminology I use throughout the video. I'd also be happy to personally answer any questions left in the comments. Thank you and enjoy. Following the world-renowned success of the Dark Souls trilogy, FromSoftware has consistently sought to replicate the structure that made the trilogy so successful and apply it to different atmospheres and styles. And they're succeeding. They keep getting away with it. With Sekiro, it was the combat system. With Elden Ring, it was the open world. And with Nightreign, it's a lot. There is so much to talk about with this game that I'm just going to focus on the playable characters for now, known as Nightfarers. There are currently 8 of them, all with different stats, passives, abilities, and ultimates that will completely define your playstyle. Each character, except Revenant, also has a specified category of weapon that is preferred, giving them an alternate and usually faster moveset for that weapon type. As sort of a disclaimer, I should make it clear that the vast majority of my experience with Nightreign is playing solo. This is because it just feels more accomplished to me. I don't trust randoms, and I don't always enjoy having to wait for my friend to get back from the daily quest his girlfriend just gave him. Nightreign was designed with 3-player co-op in mind, but it is completely beatable solo. With that out of the way, let's go through them in no particular order. Alright, I know I said no particular order, but Wilder is my favorite character, and it's kinda not even close. Part of this could be biased, since he's debatably the best for solo play, but I can't get enough of this guy. His stats are probably the most well-rounded in the entire game, and his preference of greatswords takes full advantage of them. His passive is pretty simple. Once per rest at a site of grace, any enemy attack that would have killed Wilder will instead cause him to quickly roll backwards and completely avoid its damage. This is quite literally a lifesaver, but it also allows the player to be more risky when they know that they have it available. His skill shoots a motherfucking grappling hook. I shouldn't even need to tell you anything else about it. Wilder can use this purely as a mobility tool to fling himself around the map, or he can shoot it at enemies, which deals a mild amount of damage. Small enemies are pulled towards you, and larger enemies pull you towards them. Just be careful with the latter, as mistiming this can easily throw you right into the loving jaws of Adel, who's about to use your spine as dental floss. Finally, Wilder's ultimate is a giant piss-off explosion directly in front of his face that launches him backward, and that's most of what you need to know. It deals unreasonable amounts of stance damage, and you'll find yourself pretty much always following this up with a crit. Just remember that it can be charged, and doing so nets you about 50% more damage and gets rid of the self-knockback. Wilder is the coldest badass in the roster, and he earns his spot on the front cover of the goddamn game itself. It's hard to follow up Wilder, and unfortunately I am not the biggest fan of Guardian's playstyle, but there's nothing wrong with him at all. He boasts the highest HP in the entire game, but his offensive stats are a bit lacking, only having a B in strength and C in dex compared to Wilder's A and B respectively. Guardian's passive is cool, but is also my biggest personal problem with him. Pressing dodge while blocking with a shield puts him in a defensive stance, rendering him temporarily able to fully block entire salvos of whatever bullshit your enemies could be throwing out at you. Here's my problem with this ability. You have to use a shield. Shields are undeniably useful, and guard counters are super satisfying, but especially when playing solo, every second that you spend with a shield up in this very time-restricted game is a second you could be poking your victims with a big stick. Moving on, his skill is quite simple. It's a miniature tornado in front of him that pulls enemies towards the center once. This skill on its own is kinda mediocre, but there's a relic effect that gives it a lasting duration and distributes the damage over that duration. This gives you the capability to just spawn a circle in front of you that small enemies get constantly flinched and pulled towards the center of. It honestly completely redeems this skill and turns clusters of fuckers into a game of whack-a-mole. Anyway, his ultimate is fine. It's another big circle around him that deals okay damage, but it doubles as an instant revive for all downed allies next to you, and you can give everyone immunity to damage for a bit if you hold down the button. It should be pretty clear by now that Guardian is a team-focused character, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. My personal biases of being a solo player just naturally shy me away from him a bit. Iron Eye is fun as shit. I am so glad we finally got a way to experience a viable bow build in a FromSoft game, and Iron Eye exceeds the fantasy. Unlike other titles, bows require no ammo in Nightreign, and even though Iron Eye only has a faster moveset with regular bows, his high dex is more suited for them anyway. His passive just makes enemies killed by you and your allies drop items more often, like their weapons. This is probably the lamest part about him, but there's nothing particularly wrong with it. His skill, though, is where shit gets interesting. He dashes forward with a dagger, damaging anyone he touches and giving them a weak point. While enemies have this weak point, they take 10% more damage, and enough consistent damage will cause it to detonate and deal a burst of damage and stance damage. The detonation happens much quicker on weaker enemies, but bosses require a lot of constant pressure if you want to get that proc. It cannot be understated how insane it is that this ability is tied to a skill with only a few seconds of cooldown. You can easily have the weak point permanently active on bosses, and there's still more. Iron Eye gets invincibility frames during this dash, unlike Wilder, and he can fucking crit with bows! Are you kidding me? You can take full advantage of the absurd amount of stance damage you'll be dealing with this skill by just walking up and punching a bitch with the head of an arrow. His ultimate goes even further with this as he pulls out a comically large bow with a comically large arrow and lets it loose, dealing a hefty chunk of damage and stance damage in a pretty wide line. This attack also pierces through everything. With a good lineup, you can easily clear out half or more of an entire encampment with just this ability, or just use it to proc that weak point you just put on that bitch-ass Knights cavalry that keeps sidestepping your basic attacks. Iron Eye takes the standard of bows being complete hot dog water and takes it out behind the barn. Raider is your classic Unga Bunga Bonk guy. Great health, great stamina, and a shitload of strength. And even if you don't typically like heavier weapons, Raider's moveset with colossal weapons and great axes is surprisingly smooth and just feels better than with other characters. Raider's passive is kinda weird, because it's just a few extra effects for his skill, so let's go over that instead. He just stomps the ground and then Bruce Lee-style palm strikes in front of him. Not only do you take reduced damage while using this skill and have the hyper armor of a rhinoceros, but you also literally cannot die. No matter how much damage you take while you're charging this punch, Raider eats that shit up, licks his fingers, and asks for seconds. His passive also makes it so that taking enough damage empowers the punch significantly, dealing way more damage and stance damage. The cast time becomes much slower though, so just keep that in mind. There's almost no reason not to just spam this skill every time it comes off cooldown, and the level of power you feel from it is addicting. Lastly, his ult is pretty awesome. He plunges a knife into the ground and just spawns a massive pillar of rock, which does pretty good damage and gives you and your allies an attack buff while standing near it. You can also climb on top of it or use it as a wall to separate yourself from enemies if necessary. Overall, Raider 100% lives up to the brick shithouse titan of a man fantasy. He's simple, he's straightforward, and he'll kick your head through your ass. Recluse is your universal mage character, and she does it quite well. A in mind, S in intelligence and faith, and a C or D in everything else means you're gonna swing that staff around and you're gonna like it. And you will. Probably. Like Raider, her passive is also tied to her skill, and her skill is, well, let's talk about it. Magic Cocktail is probably the most complicated and well thought out ability in the game. Enemies that take any elemental damage from any source will have a mark on them, and Recluse can use the skill up to 3 times to absorb the mark of that specific damage type. Absorbing a mark also replenishes FP from her passive, so as long as you can damage something once, you have a bottomless FP tank at your disposal. Once you get 3 marks, using the ability again will cast a spell based on what elements you have absorbed. There are 14 total outcomes for this, each with a unique effect. A fair amount of them give you some sort of offense, but there are a decent few that give defensive utility as well, like raising defense, max HP, better dodges, or literally auto-parrying enemy attacks. The only problem with this skill is that your use of it will entirely depend on the damage types you and your team have access to. And if you play solo, like me, it will usually just end up being magic damage, with sometimes a sprinkle of fire damage. It will probably also take some memorization for what combination of shit you're about to throw out once you get all 3 marks. Her ult is a great utility to have in almost any situation. Recluse gives every enemy around her a sigil, dealing light damage. Anytime you or your allies attack an enemy with a sigil, they gain a pretty ridiculous amount of HP and FP restoration. As long as you're not getting insta-killed, this can basically be your time to just go full offense with no regard to your survival. The sigil doesn't last quite as long as preferred, but it's more than powerful enough on its own, and can suddenly turn a terrible situation into a great one. My main problem with this character is how squishy she is, but I understand it. She's clearly meant to be a backline specialist, and she does a pretty damn good job at it. For anyone upset that Sekiro never got a DLC, just come play Executor instead. I know there's a pretty big army of people in the Elden Ring community that just hate katanas and everything they stand for, and their opinions are frankly pretty justified, but Executor is fun as hell and I have no problem saying that. An S in Arcane blows every other character out of the water when it comes to applying status effects, and I mean all status effects. In Elden Ring, for some inexplicable reason, Frostbite and Scarlet Rot were the only 2 status effects that just straight up were not affected by Arcane in any way, leaving most Arcane builds with just bleed, and I guess poison too sometimes. But not in Nightreign. Executor can make use of every status effect in the game significantly more than his peers, although you're probably only gonna care about bleed most of the time. Anyway, Executor's passive will rarely see use, but it's not entirely useless. It just gives him an attack and stamina regen buff after recovering from status inflicted on him. Keyword here being recovering, meaning that if you get poisoned, the entire duration has to expire before you can enjoy that buff, or you have to cure it. His skill, though, is his bread and butter. Executor pulls out his Cursed Sword, which can be used like a normal katana, but has a unique Sekiro-style deflection mechanic tied to its guard, which, when properly timed, can result in significantly less stamina loss and deal stance damage to the attacker. Additionally, after deflecting a few attacks, the sword glows, and you can use the weapon art to dash forward and deal pretty hefty damage to those in your way. This skill is fucking awesome, but I have the same sort of problem with it that I have with Guardian. When you're deflecting attacks, you're not dealing damage and not killing things as quickly as you could be. To balance this, I usually just use the curse sword during the night bosses, where you can take as long as you want without any drawbacks. Executor's ultimate is cool, but much less exciting. He transforms into a huge beast with a huge health bar for a bit, kinda just swinging his claws around at anything unlucky enough to be around him. I have one pretty big problem with this ability. For some stupid reason, after he transforms, Executor just gets a stance bar and can be stance broken by big enough attacks from bosses and the like, and is forced onto the ground if this happens, pretty much negating most of the ultimate. I have no idea why this was a conscious decision made to give an ultimate ability its own super random drawback, but it doesn't happen too often and you can still get plenty of use out of it. Executor is more than capable of handling anything thrown at him. I just wish they gave him a wolf skin. If Executor is for the Sekiro enjoyers, then the Duchess is for the Bloodborne ones. I don't want to start out negative because this character is awesome, but she has an incredibly confusing stat page that I just can't fully wrap my head around. Her preferred weapons are daggers, which lend themselves to dexterity for damage and arcane for status buildup, but her highest scaling is actually intelligence with an A, and then faith and mind both have a B, with her dexterity, arcane, and endurance at a B, C, and D respectively. It seems like they wanted Duchess to sort of be a caster hybrid, but that is completely unnecessary and is honestly a suboptimal way to play this character. Moving on, Duchess's passive is one of the most fun parts of playing her. She's able to dodge twice in succession with higher speed and more iframes, letting her almost completely spam her way through otherwise difficult to avoid attack strings. These dodges also consume less stamina than normal, which is extremely important as she inherently suffers from low endurance. Her skill is honestly kind of overpowered and more than makes up for her janky statistics. Just by pressing the button, she reapplies all damage enemies have suffered in the past 3 seconds at about half effectiveness. And this means all damage. Crits, bleed procs, your teammates' ultimates, Duchess can just serve that shit up a second time whenever her skill is available. Additionally, this skill can be used at pretty much any time. There's no cast animation, and it doesn't interrupt whatever you're doing, so feel free to press it whenever. Her ultimate is a really cool idea that unfortunately is pretty inconsistent in practice. Activating it makes her and her allies invisible for about 10 seconds, which doesn't get broken when attacking. The problem with this is that enemies will still attack you when you strike them, as constantly getting poked with a pair of disembodied knives is usually a pretty big indicator that someone is up to some fuckery. They just won't know exactly where you are. Quite a lot of enemies, and especially bosses, have large sweeping attacks that reach all around them, and there are times when you feel like this ability does nothing. It can still be very useful defensively to give you some time to heal and such, but it doesn't quite fit the definition of invisible. Regardless, the Duchess is an elegant badass with quite a few tricks up her sleeve that won't let you down. I think I honestly just suck at Revenant. This seems to be the character that the community is most divided about how good she is, and I'm just as confused as everyone else. Before I start going on a negative spiel, I like her playstyle, and I don't want to roast her or treat her like she's as useful as a USB pet rock. Compared to Recluse as a fellow caster, her stats are a bit more spread out. She has worse endurance and only a B in intelligence, but has slightly more dex and better arcane for some reason. Her faith clearly lends itself to incantations, but you'll have to get pretty lucky to get a seal with something like Swarm of Flies or Rotten Breath to make use of her arcane. Moving on to her passive, Revenant raises the souls of the basic enemies she kills, which continue to fight for her for a bit. There's a couple problems with this ability. Firstly, this is literally useless in boss fights. Granted, characters like Iron Eye also have this problem, but this passive feels more like a part of her identity, whereas Iron Eyes just feels like some sprinkles on the triple scoop fudge sundae that is the rest of his kit. The other problem being that this only triggers on enemies that you kill, not your teammates. And good fucking luck getting anyone to intentionally not last hit trash mobs so you can have a chance at temporarily building a mini army. Her skill is similar, as she can choose to summon 3 different members of her, family. Helen, who is a page without the crossbow, Frederick, who is a pumpkinhead without the pumpkin, and Sebastian, who is one of those big annoying ghost skeletons. She can only have one out at a time, and when they die or you put them away, they slowly regenerate their lost health. These guys fall into the same trap as her passive, with just not being very useful against bosses, especially Night Lords. Helen can easily be killed in 2 to 3 hits from a Night Lord, and Sebastian literally cannot move and does not deal much damage. Frederick is honestly great, but he still dies much faster than preferred, and his health takes a pretty long while to come back. Her ultimate makes her and all of her friends unable to be killed for about 15 seconds, leaving them at 1 HP anytime they would have died. Each family member also has a unique ability that they use while under this buff, but none of them are particularly spectacular. I didn't know this at first, but this also acts as an instant revive for your downed teammates, although they won't get the buff that comes with it. Unfortunately, due to her peanut-sized health bar, you might end up being the one that needs to get revived on loop. It's clear that Revenant was meant to be a supportive caster, but not having a mechanic to restore FP like Recluse means you're probably going to have to make those colossal sword memes a reality if you don't want to constantly be a dead weight. Honestly, I think Revenant needs a buff, and I think that buff should be making her family tankier. There are going to be times when all of them will be dead at the same time, and during that, you'd be better off as literally any other character. There's a lot to work with though, and some people swear by her, and I can't fully blame them. If I had to rate each character from best to worst, at least for solo play, I would probably say this: Wilder, then Raider, then Iron Eye, then Executor, then Duchess, then Recluse, then Guardian, then Revenant. Of course, all of them are very different from one another, but it's important to note that you're always playing the same game. Every Nightfarer is fully capable of tackling every situation, so feel free to mix and match your playstyles with each. Or don't! I'm not your fucking dad. Ain't nothing wrong with being a one-trick pony either.